Hello, this is the boy in his Bible speaking again, and we're moving now in transition from the birth of the nation that was conceived in Genesis, um, grew in the womb of Egypt for 400 years, took 430 years before this nation was born, and then the 12 tribes of Jacob um, became the one Israel that was going to be rescued from Egypt and taken into the promised land. And that transition into the promised land, we see a lot of changes going on to the lifestyle and the way things took place when they were in the wilderness journey. The impact to me of reading Joshua and Judges was quite startling as a boy. And some years later, I had the privilege of seeing a good friend of Scripture Union called John Stott, who used to be at All Souls Langham Place. He wrote some things for us to go into a Bible that we were producing, Revised Standard Version, and to have our own study edition. And he contributed to the land of the Bible. And I think maybe some of John Stott's article, extended article, scholarly description of the land of Israel was influenced in my reading, later reading of Joshua, Judges, and Ruth. They are the three books that deal with the land. But you will notice in the Bible there's always a transition. Always a transition. Things are always changing. And sometimes it takes hundreds of years, but things change. You have this demonstrated, of course, from the Old Testament to the New Testament. When you finish off with your Malachi and other books at the end of the Old Testament, and you just turn your page over and you come to Matthew, it's a different world. There's a different culture. There's different expressions of the Jewish faith, and there's different people. The Levites don't seem to be very strong, but the Pharisees do, and the Sadducees do, and all these kind of things. And there's now synagogues all over the place. You didn't find that in the Old Testament, and the road has opened up for travelling, and so therefore you can move from city to city in a much more natural way and easy way. There is transition in the Bible. And what we have is the movement from the birth of the nation, the education of the nation, the tragic wilderness journeys of the nation, and the incredible three powerful sermons of Moses before he entered into the mountain and was taken by God in his death that was there. And no one ever could do anything with the body of Moses, although they would weep for him for many days, as you would expect. So we come to Joshua. Joshua, we know, was a young man in the life of Moses and lived 40 years with Moses, and now has become not so young. And you could say that if you want a new transition, don't choose an old man. Well, God chose an old man. And although he was chosen by Moses, he was called by God. God spoke to him. It was God who said to him, be strong, etc., etc. Be not afraid. I'm going to be with you. And you're going to conquer the land. And so what we have in Joshua is, first of all, the spying out of the land. Then we have the conquest of the land. Then we have the proportion of the land into the 12 tribes. And then we end with an incredible declaration of Joshua. For him and his family, they would serve the Lord, and its impact, that dedication in his dying days, that dedication that it would have upon Israel for the next 20 years. And so in the book of Joshua, there are various clearly discerning things that we can see. One of the things that puzzled me, if you might remember with the story of Moses, when he was going to be a prophet in Egypt, his wife was very cross with him because he hadn't circumcised his children. You might remember the story. Well, when we come to the book of Joshua, one of the first things that needed to be done was all the men needed to be circumcised. They had stopped circumcising in the wilderness. And I just think that is a picture of a people that had a covenant with God, but they were not living as covenant people. And if you're going to possess the land, the symbolism of the land, of course, in New Testament terms, is the gospel of Jesus Christ and its impact on culture and on the world. If you're going to possess the land, you've got to be serious about the covenant. And the covenant, which we'll find later in the Old Testament, is very clear for us to see. A covenant which was performed by the Lord Jesus Christ, and we remember it each time we take communion, eat bread and drink wine of the new covenant. Covenant prophesied by Jeremiah, I think in chapter 32, or thereabout anyway. This truth that you need, I'm going to conquer the land, but first I need to be right with God. And there's many promises given to us as Christians where we can be, quote, successful, but we need to be right with God. There are some people who are naturally successful in their business world and they accumulate a lot of wealth. Well, I can't see anywhere in the Bible where wealth wasn't used for other people. It's demonstrated in the life of Job, who was one of the wealthiest people of his time, and you see how much he took care of people in his life. And he couldn't understand why he had all these problems, considering everything that he had, he shared. And so we see in Joshua, first get right with God. That's a wonderful truth, to get right with God. Now let me give you some others, and they come very natural. The first is, and this is what I've written down, the God of faithfulness and the God of battle. We come now to a problem, and the problem is the cleansing of the land. The land had been promised to Abraham some 430 years, well, more than 430 years earlier, and it had been confirmed to Jacob and also to Isaac. And even Joseph, in his dying, realized that there was a land, because he made sure that it was recorded that his bones would return to the land of promise. The land was promised, but now that in the 400 years since, and definitely the last 40 years, tribes had grown and got strong, and they believed not only in other gods, but their moral lives was a reflection of a wrong belief. Even to the sad effect that if there was no rain, sometimes they would sacrifice their children, calling upon God, their gods, to give them rain, or things like that. Anyway, the life in the promised land was bad. But the question is, can we justify a powerful nation trying to take control of lesser powerful nations, and in the name of God? That's the big question. And that's a big question. That is a big question. And I don't know the answers to that question. I talk to theologians about these questions, about the cleansing of the land. I call it cleansing of the land more than ethnic cleansing. What I can tell you is this, that before the children of Israel were to conquer the land, it was very clear in the talking of Moses in his final sermon that he made it very, very clear that the judgment of God was upon the Jewish people if they didn't keep the covenant, their oneness with God, and their blessing to other people. It's also very clear that the stranger and the widowed were supposed to become part of the commonwealth of Israel. They were not to be rejected. It's also very clear that if a nation said, we will join or submit, at least submit to the tribes of Israel, they would be spared. So there's something there of mercy going on, as well as saying to the Jews, don't you raise a sword against anybody else if you're not prepared to raise a sword against yourself. I think there are parallels to that in the New Testament, where it says judgment must begin first at the house of God. And judgment always begins first with those who hold responsibility. Well, they conquered the land, and many of the tribes find themselves running away from the Israelites. We find slowly that the Israelites now, instead of living in tents, are living in houses. Most of the houses not even built by them. A land that's flowing with milk and honey, and they now possess it, and they're strong, strong enough to take over the land. When you have the allocation of the land, not only is it in the Midlands in which they've come, but it's north and it's south. They take over the land. However, they never did, not even in Joshua's time, get rid of all the tribes that was in the land. And what was predictable happened. Many of the tribes of the land intermingled and married into the tribes of Israel and vice versa. So now what you've got is not 12 tribes serving God and cleansing the land, but 12 tribes in the land, but they haven't cleansed it. Now there are questions there, and you must read it for yourself and come to your own. There are some marvelous things that are said in Job, marvelous events that took place in Job. You've got stories, for instance, of Nineveh and the rescue of a prostitute's house, who may have been part of an ancestor of Jesus eventually, which we read in Matthew's Gospel in the first chapter in the genealogy. You've got events where the spies were able to escape, and they give a good report of what could be done and what could be achieved. You have again, and it is again, the destruction of Nineveh. And scholars tell us that that is one of the oldest cities in the Eastern world. And maybe in the world as well, I don't know, but again, you can read that up. It's not too difficult to find that information. And now you have the spread of the 12 tribes, and they're going to be fighting each other. And that's going to be a sad tale. When you come to Joshua, there's some key truths that are worth taking into consideration. The first one is be obedient. That was workable while Joshua was alive, and workable for the first 3 years after he died. An obedient people who needed to be strong in God, to get their strength from God. This is for us all, not only to be obedient, but also to be strong. And then they needed to be radical. Some of the things they did were strange to the world. I mean, walking around Jericho every day, then in the last 7 days, and the wall fall down. That was a radical way of taking a war and bringing fear into so many people. And then there is the sense of being fair. When people did say, we'll serve you, they would accept it. There wasn't this kind of let's kill everybody. There was opportunity. It's a strange war in the Old Testament is strange. And as we're told that with God, God's wrath is a strange thing with God, and I've no doubt war was as well. And these are the very clear things that you have. Now let me tell you one important thing, and it's this, that in the book of Job, it says, and I've choose you this day, that's the verse I was looking for, whom you will serve. He spent 40 years in the wilderness. He's become the general that has taken them into the promised land. He's divided the land up into the 12 parts. He's actually had written in a book all the things that should be taking place. Well organized kind of man. And he's dying. He's coming to the end. And he brings the leaders together. Well, he brings Israel and he says, choose you this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. This is the boy in his Bible giving you some reflections on the book of Joshua. It's an interesting book to read. Bye for now.